Redemption Flats. Wyoming was not a town that welcomed anything unusual. In this place, where the land was drier than the hearts of its people, everything had to fit just right. Men had to be tough, women had to be small, and anyone born outside that mold became something to whisper about behind closed doors. That was why Nyola Redfeather had never truly belonged. She was a tall Apache woman, her muscles carved like red rock from the desert, broad shoulders, a straight back, solid arms. The body of a warrior. Not the kind of wife the white folks in town liked to picture. Her husband, the only man who had ever seen her as a real woman, had died in a mining accident many years ago. Since then, Nyola had lived alone, surrounded by wary glances and heavy silences. She worked as a wheelwright, a job meant for men. Every day, the hammer striking hot iron rang out like the beat of her own heart. She lifted wheels that weighed twice as much as an average woman, heated steel until it glowed red, and pressed it into wood with her bare, calloused hands. The town needed her. But they did not accept her. They needed her strength, but feared it at the same time. At night, when the fire in the workshop slowly died down, Nyola would often sit alone, staring at her scarred hands. Deep down, she believed she was simply too big, too strong, too different to ever be loved again. And so, she expected nothing more than a quiet life, until the day fate stepped through the door of her wheel shop. That afternoon, Redemption Flats was covered in a thin layer of pale yellow dust. Nyola was bent over a large wagon wheel, her hammer striking steady rhythms against the glowing iron rim. Sweat slid down her solid shoulder, dripping onto the hot ground below. The slow clatter of horse hooves echoed in front of the workshop. Nyola looked up. A man stood there, smaller than most she had ever seen. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and he held the reins like they were the only thing keeping him from floating away. His face was gentle, almost too gentle for this rough corner of the Wild West. Ethan Cole, owner of a farm so small, people in town joked it was just a garden with a fence. Ethan lived quietly, shyly, steering clear of saloons and long conversations alike. Folks knew very little about him, except that he had never married, had never been in a fight, and had never been seen leaving town with a woman. He led the horse forward, his voice so soft it was nearly swallowed by the wind. The wheel is loose." Nyola wiped her hands on her apron and stepped over. As she stood to her full height, Ethan instinctively swallowed hard. She was a head taller than him, built like a solid wall. He had heard whispered stories about the giant Apache woman, but standing in front of her now, he felt no fear. What stopped him in his tracks were her eyes. Nyola noticed it immediately. No judgment in his gaze, no crude curiosity, none of the ever-present fear she had grown used to. Ethan looked her straight in the eyes, as if she were simply a person. She knelt beside the wheel, her voice low and steady. "Let me take a look." Ethan stood frozen, not daring to move. His heart was pounding so fast, even he found it funny. He had never stood this close to a woman before, never smelled hot iron mixed with leather and wood, never quite known where to look when a woman was right there in front of him. As Nyola tightened the wheel's axle, Ethan scrambled to find words, as if silence might betray something he did not want revealed. If anything else comes up, I will come back." Nyola looked up at him. For the first time in years, she saw a man blush, just from standing in front of her. And as Ethan led his horse away, both of them knew one thing deep down: this would not be the last time they met. After that day, Redemption Flats began to grow familiar with a certain pattern. Ethan Cole started showing up at Nyola's wheel shop more often than necessary. One time, he said the wagon's hinges were squeaking. Another, the rear axle was off-center. And there was a day when he just stood there awkwardly for a long moment before stammering, The horse is not walking evenly." Nyola did not ask many questions. She simply nodded, picked up her tools, and got to work like always. But inside her, something was slowly beginning to shift. Ethan did not look at her the way others did. He did not avoid her, nor did he put on a show of false courage. He simply stood there, small and unsure, clutching his hat, his eyes always drifting back to her when he thought she was not watching. But Nyola always noticed. She noticed how Ethan always kept just enough distance. Like he was afraid that touching her might be too much. Too daring. She noticed how, whenever she stepped closer, he would hold his breath. Not from fear, but from something closer to nervous awe. Afternoons passed in the sounds of hammers, wood, and short, careful conversations. "You live alone on that farm?" Nyola asked once, her voice soft. Ethan nodded. "Yes." For a long time, he said nothing more. She did not press him, but in that moment, they both understood. Behind that simple answer was a loneliness they both knew well. One day, as Nyola lifted a heavy wagon wheel onto the rack, Ethan stepped forward without thinking. Let me help." She turned to look at him. The wheel was so heavy. It would take 2 full-grown men to manage it. Ethan knew that, but still, he reached out. Nyola hesitated for a second, then gave a small nod. When their hands met on the rough wooden rim, Ethan could feel her strength. Not violent, but steady and unshakable. And Nyola realized Ethan's hands were not trembling. He was smaller, weaker. But he did not back down. The wheel landed on the rack. Ethan was breathing hard. Face flushed red. "Sorry, I was not much help." Nyola shook her head. "You stayed." That one sentence stopped Ethan in his tracks. That evening, as Ethan walked away, Nyola stood watching his small figure fade into the distance for a long time. Inside her, an old fear began to stir again. If she let herself hope, would it frighten him? And Ethan, riding the dusty road back to his little farm, realized something he had not felt in years. He was looking forward to tomorrow. Redemption Flats had never truly accepted Nyola Redfeather. They tolerated her so long as the wagon wheels kept turning, so long as she remained useful. But when folks started noticing Ethan Cole showing up at her wheel shop a little too often, that tolerance quickly turned into discomfort. The stares lasted longer. The whispers grew quieter. And before long, secret meetings began to take place behind the closed doors of the town hall. "We cannot let this go any further," said a gruff voice. "She is Apache, and far too large. It is not right. But we still need the wheel shop." They called Nyola a problem to be dealt with, as if she were a broken post in the middle of the road, not a living, breathing human being. The solution they came up with was cold and practical. Marry her off, along with the wheel shop, to any man willing to take her. That man would own the land, the tools, and the giant Apache woman. As part of the deal, the town would keep the trade alive and rid itself of the discomfort named Nyola Redfeather. The rumors spread faster than desert wind. Nyola heard them one late afternoon, when a regular customer made a half-joking comment. "Word is, someone's about to start taking care of you." She froze. Her hammer slipped from her hand and hit the ground. It was not fear she felt. It was something far deeper, an insult that struck to the bone. All those years, she had endured the looks, the words, the distance. But this was the first time they planned to sell her like property. That night, Ethan heard the story too, from a worker at the saloon. Town council's calling an emergency meeting. About that Apache woman, Ethan could not sleep. The image of Nyola standing alone in the middle of town would not leave his mind. She was so strong that people forgot she might ever need protecting. But Ethan knew just how deep her loneliness ran beneath that strength. The next morning, when Nyola saw Ethan standing outside the wheel shop, there was something different in his face. No more hesitation. No more lowered eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Ethan looked up, his gaze trembling but firm. "They are meeting tonight," he said. "And they are going to talk about you." Nyola said nothing. In that moment, both of them understood. Their quiet feelings had just been dragged into the light, and Redemption Flats was about to force them to make a choice. Thank you for being here. If this story reminded you of another time of red dust afternoons and the echo of hooves pounding like heartbeats, then subscribe to my channel so we can sit together again tomorrow, and I will tell you another story from the Old West. That night, the town meeting was more crowded than anyone had ever seen. Over 300 people packed into the hall of Redemption Flats. The sound of chairs scraping, boots on wood, and whispers hanging thick in the air made the room feel like a storm waiting to break. On the raised platform, the town council sat upright, their faces stern, as if preparing to handle a great crisis. Nyola Redfeather stood in the center of the room, alone. Her towering frame made it impossible to ignore her. But this time, the silence surrounding her was not out of fear. It was judgment. They looked at her the way people look at a problem that needs to be neatly solved. "We all know why we are here tonight," one councilman began, his voice echoing through the hall. "Redemption Flats cannot continue in this unstable situation." Words like Apache, unfit. The town's safety were tossed out cold. Detached. No one said her name. No one asked what she wanted. She stood still, hands clenched at her sides. She was used to being talked about. Not with. Then the door of the hall burst open. Ethan Cole walked in. His appearance made a few people chuckle quietly. The small, shy rancher, the man who had never raised his voice in the saloon, now stood before a room full of hardened men. Ethan did not stop. He walked straight to the front, then stepped up and placed his foot on the council's long table, a move that silenced the entire room. "I am sorry," he said, voice shaking, but loud enough for all to hear. "But you are talking about the woman I love." The whispers exploded. Nyola spun around. In that instant, she forgot to breathe. Ethan took a deep breath. "Nyola Redfeather is not a problem. She is the reason the wheels of this town have kept turning. She is someone you need, but never had the courage to respect." He turned to her. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were steady. In front of 300 people, Ethan dropped to one knee. "Nyola," he said, voice breaking. "I am not rich. I am not strong. I have nothing to brag about, but if you will let me, I want to stand by you." For the rest of my life, the entire hall went silent. Nyola looked down at the small man kneeling before her. In that moment, every whisper from all the years fell away. There was no more Apache or white. No more too big or too small. There was only a man, brave enough to stand up for her. Her lips trembled. Then she nodded. Yes, the room erupted, but Nyola heard none of it. She saw only Ethan, the man who changed her life with a single sentence. Nyola and Ethan's wedding took place right there in the wheel shop. No roses. No orchestra. Just the glow of the forge, the scent of burning wood and hot metal, and a handful of brave friends who stayed to offer their blessings. Redemption Flats did not erupt in applause, but no one dared to object, either. Nyola stood in the center of the workshop, tall and steady, wearing a simple dress. For the first time in her life, she did not feel too big. She just felt chosen. Ethan stood across from her, gripping her hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. He was trembling not from fear of the crowd, but because this moment felt far too big for a man who had lived most of his life in silence. When the ceremony ended, the doors of the wheel shop closed. The forge burned low, casting a warm glow on the rough wooden walls. In the small back room where Nyola often rested after long nights of work, Ethan stood awkwardly. He took off his hat, then put it back on, then took it off again. I have never." The words caught in his throat. Nyola looked at him for a long time. She had carried that fear for years, afraid of hurting someone, afraid her strength was something that had to be hidden. But now, standing in front of this quiet man, she realized, if she kept running, they would lose each other again. Nyola stepped forward. Each footfall was firm, but her heart shook like it was going into battle for the first time. She placed her hand on Ethan's chest, feeling the pounding rhythm beneath her fingers. "Look at me," she whispered. Ethan looked up. His eyes were filled with worry, but also with trust. Nyola's voice dropped, soft and steady, like a vow spoken into the dark. "Do not resist. Tonight, you are mine." Ethan swallowed hard. All the fear, all the self-doubt melted beneath the power of that quiet gentleness. He did not step back. He did not flinch. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to be held. There was no rush, no taking. Only two people who had once been broken, learning how to touch without hurting. Outside, Redemption Flats slept under a quiet night, and in that small room, a man and a woman had finally found where they belonged, in each other's arms. After the wedding, Redemption Flats did not change overnight, But it began to shift. On the first morning, Ethan woke up in the little room behind the wheel shop. Sunlight spilled through the cracks in the wooden shutters. He lay still for a long time, listening to Nyola's steady breathing beside him. There was no fear. No feeling like it was all just a dream, only a strange kind of peace, the kind he had never known before. Ethan began to change. He no longer walked with his head down through town, no longer avoided people's eyes. The shyness was still there, but inside it stood something new, a quiet confidence that came from being loved and being chosen. His small farm slowly came back to life. Nyola helped him fix the fences, build new pens, and replace every old wagon wheel with ones she crafted by hand. People began to see the giant Apache woman out in the fields, hauling wood, driving posts into the ground, working side by side with her husband in a wordless rhythm, and they began to see her differently. Nyola's wheel shop became busier than ever. Folks who once avoided her gaze now stood in line. Awkward, but polite. No one dared call her a problem anymore. She was the one keeping wagons, carts, and the entire town moving forward. In the evenings, Nyola and Ethan sat on the porch of the wheel shop. Ethan would read a few lines from an old book, while Nyola sharpened her tools under the soft glow of a kerosene lamp. Their conversations were short, simple, but filled with presence. "Do you regret it?" Nyola asked once, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shook his head, without hesitation. "I only regret not having lived sooner." Nyola smiled. A smile no longer guarded, no longer careful. Over time, Redemption Flats grew used to the sight. A small man walking beside a large woman, neither of them trying to prove anything to the world, just living kindly, working hard, and staying close. And in that quiet, the town slowly learned something. Strength is not something to fear. It is something to trust. Years later, people still talked about Redemption Flats as a town that had once been stubborn to the core. And yet, it was the very place that witnessed a simple truth. One that not everyone is brave enough to believe. Love does not need to please the eyes of others. It only needs to fit the hearts of two people. Nyola Redfeather was no longer the giant Apache woman whispered about behind closed doors. She was the wheelwright everyone turned to when an axle cracked, when a delivery had to make it on time, when the whole town needed to keep rolling forward. Her strength no longer frightened people. It reassured them. Ethan Cole was still that small man, no taller, no broader. But in his eyes, there now lived something that had never been there before. The quiet peace of someone who knows exactly where he belongs. He did not need to be bigger than the world. He only needed to be big enough to stand beside his wife. In the evenings, when the sun painted the dusty roads red, the two of them would sit in front of the wheel shop. Ethan mending harnesses, Nyola sharpening tools. Few words were spoken. But their silence was no longer a gap. It was presence. Someone once asked Ethan, over drinks at the saloon, "Doesn't it feel strange being married to someone stronger than you?" Ethan simply smiled. "No," he replied. "It feels lucky." And Nyola, whenever she looked down at her scarred hands, no longer felt ashamed. She saw the marks of labor, of survival, of a woman who had walked through loss and still dared to love again. Redemption Flats changed not because it wanted to, but because it had to face the truth. Not all pieces are carved to match. Some are broken in just the right way, to fit perfectly, when placed beside the right one. And so, in the wild heart of the West, a shy man and a giant woman lived out their days together, not to prove anything, not to please anyone, but to remind the world, when two broken pieces fit, they are not broken anymore. They become whole. Dear friends, the love story of Nyola and Ethan was never about perfection. It was about two hearts that had once been shattered, a woman so strong the world feared her, and a man so small he once feared himself. But when they chose to truly see each other, all judgment lost its power. Real love does not ask how tall you are, how strong you seem, or whether you meet someone else's standards. It only asks one thing: are you brave enough to choose each other? And when two people dare to choose each other, they do not just save themselves, they teach the world how to love. It has been an honor to share this story with you. Wherever you are, I hope you are safe. I hope you are happy. And I hope you are loved. I love you, my cherished audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know how this story made you feel. Leave a comment down below. Type the number 3 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe so you never miss the next tale from the Wild West.